Michael 7. Michael! And today, we have Ray Felix, and we also have from the Sub Network team, Ranger. How you guys doing today?
Good.
Thanks for having us.
Awesome. So
that's my schizophrenic side.
we're gonna jump all in because you're a comic book creator. Mm-hmm. You have your own company, right?
Yep.
You also started your own comic book convention.
Yes.
So let's go further back. How'd you get into this whole
Comic book thing?
the whole comic book thing and turning it into a business?
Oh my God. All right, I'll take it right back to the beginning. When I was 15, I always wanted to own my own comic book store. Mm-hmm. So I worked in a store, and then when I moved to Baltimore, me and my cousin were trying to open up a store. But this was like in 1992. Then like we noticed that the market was changing. Mm-hmm. People were not reading as much because the books went up. So, and it was still, people were reading more back then than they are now. But it just started changing, and falling apart. So we were like, maybe we'll wait. And 94 got worse. So,
right.
So we never opened up a comic book store. It never happened. And then we kind of split, went our separate ways. He got married, had kids. I came back to New York. And then when I read this comic book when I was younger, still like a teenager, it said, it was a Batman book, and it talked about how Bob Kane and Bill Finger were from the Bronx, and how Jerry Robinson was from New Jersey but moved to the Bronx. And I was like, oh, this is not too far. This is like in my area. So I went to find out where it was, like that neighborhood, and then I moved there. So the whole idea was, if all these people like Regis Philbin and Will Eisner and all these, and like Colin Powell and all these people came from this borough, there must be some kind of like energy that you could tap into, right? Like, like a ley line of some sort.
Right.
Even Stan Lee, they all went to the same high school, like Stan Lee, Bob Kane, and Bill Finger, the guys who created Batman, they all...
So there's something there.
Definitely.
Absolutely.
Then
yeah.
you had like television actors, all these people, shows that I grew up watching, like Happy Days, Laverne and Shirley. A lot of those people came from the Bronx too, from the same neighborhood. So I moved in and I was like, I need to tap into this and try to connect to the energy. And that's what I did. And then just last year, I represented Will Eisner's family and did a 75th anniversary of The Spirit. So it's kind of interesting that if you do that, and and I met Athena Finger and had her come to the Women in Comics event as well. So everything's connected. I really believe, a firm believer in energy, and that energy is subtle and we can tap into it. And if you're positive and thought, you can actually make things happen. It sounds silly, but it's true.
No, I love it. I dig it.
So sorry.
It's all about who you're around and what's there and opportunity.
Sure.
Yes.
Definitely. The people that you're around, if they're either good energy or bad energy, they're going to affect you. You know, so you have to really think about how to navigate away from that.
Right.
And then once I was there, I was like, what's next? So I said, let me get into publishing. So one summer after graduating out of college, I sent out 50 resumes trying to get into comic book companies and all these like different studios, like HBO and stuff. Nothing came of it. And this one guy, Tom DeFalco, who probably doesn't remember this, it was a long time ago, in '99, he says, why don't you just start your own thing? And he says, you're not fit for the mainstream. You're not a mainstream artist. And I was like, yeah, my teacher was Carmen Infantino in college. He created The Flash, and I was like, he said the same thing. So I was just like, why not?
So it's a sign.
Just try it, right? Who knows? So I started doing my own comics, started doing conventions. And
this is Bronx Heroes, correct?
This is before Bronx Heroes. I was doing a line of wacky comedian comics, and then I created World Without Superheroes, when I was in college. And then they didn't really sell well, It's like, they were like so-so. And then Bronx Heroes came out in about 2006. It was a meeting of a bunch of artists, and my roommate, who lives with me right now, Mike, he was the first one to scream it out. We were like trying to think of a name, Bronx in comics, and he says, why don't you call it Bronx Heroes? And I was like, that's a great idea. So Bronx Heroes was born through a whim, and like he works at Marvel now and stuff. So we just started doing Bronx Comics, then we did a convention, through the Longwood Gallery. I made connections with the community, like the Bronx Council of the Arts. They were a big hand in making this happen, and just tapping into different people, like the community board. And I just felt that if this is for the people, then we should tap into the community and those resources.
Right.
You know, so the federal government, you know, gives money to every state for the arts.
Oh.
And I was like, how do I get that?
How do I get that money?
How do I get that money? And it's because if you're an artist, right, and it's given out, why not?
Right. To support
So I
your
did a lot of
craft.
research,
Yeah.
right? So, and they did. They helped support the publications of the books, the conventions. They helped sponsor us, and then BronxNet was a big help in that as well. And then the conventions kind of just took a life of its own. You know, we had different people came into the world of the Bronx Heroes and just helped it grow. You know, people. It was like a revolving door of just different people coming in and giving a hand. And then in 2009, I think, or 2010, I was like, I'm done. I'm tired of conventions. There's too many conventions. You know, it's like there's one too many. So does the Bronx really need a convention?
Conventions are exhausting.
And they're exhausting because
Yeah.
it's you're planning an entire year for one day.
Yeah.
So, and then that was around the lawsuit, which I guess we'll get into later.
Oh.
So the lawsuit was like killing me. So I was just like, we're gonna do something else. So I approached my friend Regine Sawyer, and she was doing women in comics panels, you know, in the Bronx Heroes show since the Bronx Heroes basically started. So I said, why don't we do a women in comics convention and you run it?
Right.
Like,
Stumping on her.
right. So
I have this idea, you do it.
right. So it happened. We did some gallery shows, the same origins. It started from panels to then we started doing gallery shows for women in comics, and then I was like, let's just do a show. And it came out at a panel. We had the women were there, they were talking, and I just said, why don't you guys do like a company, like an all-female comic book company or something? Like we know so many talented people, it's time to pull them together.
Right.
And then they did. And it became a life of its own. Now it's like beyond me and Regine. It's like we did 3 years of women in comics, you know, as a convention.
It's incredible.
Yeah, it's wild. You know, it's really wild. I'm sorry I'm talking too much.
It's all right. No, we like it.
All right.
So when it comes to the comic book creation, do you do the story, the artwork, the inking, coloring, everything, or?
Well, certain projects, yeah. If there's like an immediacy for me to get an idea out, like Edgar Allan Poe, I did that all myself. Initial Bronx Heroes was 3 guys that start. Actually, it was 4 guys that started. Then it went to 2 guys. Now it's back to me, and now I'm farming out work to like different people, like Tura Von Eden, who created Black Lightning for DC Comics. He was one of our artists for the Black Power character. He did the first 2 issues, and then I had drawn the Roach feature. Dmitry Gubin, who's also a Brooklynite, he did Heavy Traffic, and then Chris Duckett later came on and he helped us with some extras, like things that weren't like finishes and stuff, like different pages that were undone.
So do you use freelancers at all, or do you like use people that you know and like?
Well, both. I met so many people in the conventions and doing my own show that I just started to say, hey, again with the same idea with women in comics, why aren't I utilizing these people? There's a lot of guys that have been in the industry that don't work for the industry anymore. A lot of these guys are like, you know, they're up in age, and the corporations don't support the people that made their business.
Right. Unfortunately.
And they're freelancing doing indie work. So like Paris Cullins, a great artist, he created Blue Devil. It's one of the top books back in the 80s when I was little. And, you know, they're not really hiring him to do work. He'll get like a job every few years, or, you know, if he gets, I think he gets more stuff from Marvel than DC these days. So he's working on the new issues of Black Power, and I ended up registering the name, and we called it The Greatest Hero Black Power, you know, and just to have like more prominent name. So Bronx Heroes is still a book, but now we're like kind of what Marvel did in the beginning, where you had Tales of Suspense, and you had 2 heroes in each book, and Tales to Astonish, and you had 2 superheroes, and then they came out like Captain America and Iron Man were in one book, and then you had Shield and Doctor Strange in another book, and eventually they branched off into their own books.
Right.
So now Bronx Heroes as a universe and as a publishing company, I'm branching them off. So the Roach will have his own title. Black Power
Bronx
has
Heroes
its
is
own
like
title.
more of like an umbrella.
Now it's becoming an umbrella.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. Because originally the company was called Couple Java Studios, which was a ridiculous name, but I like
Couple Java's team.
Yeah. So I was like, just call it Bronx Heroes.
So I agree with that.
And it's easier to remember.
Right.
So it kind of just rolls off the tongue. You say Bronx Heroes, and then people say Bronx Heroes, and like Stanley's like, I didn't know there was heroes in the Bronx. I was like, of course they are. You know what I mean? It's like, so it's just like, it kind of like intrigues people. You know, just like women in comics. It's like
There are women in comics?
they're women in comics. Yeah. It just so creating these like taglines to get people excited. You know, which is like advertising and stuff like that. Trying to get that to hook people in. And that's,
Well, like you mentioned, gotta access. You use the word heroes.
Yeah.
And Marvel and DC had I didn't even know that was a thing.
Oh. Yeah.
That you can't use the word heroes.
Well, superheroes specifically.
Yeah.
Heroes you can, but superheroes.
So
the thing is, like,
I was mentioned one time before that people are also using the word metahuman and instead of superhero.
And they trademarked that as well.
They did. Oh, okay.
Because Marvel had mutant, so DC came up with metahuman.
Okay.
But they didn't even come up with it. They just opened up the dictionary. But
Right.
So yeah, we're in a war in this country for expression. People don't realize this, but basic words that we use every day are being trademarked, and corporations are controlling these words, and they're saying you can't use it. And superheroes is one of those words. Now, they used to claim that they created the word superhero, so when I was sued in court, I had to prove that they did not, and I did. So, and it was kind of funny, but they were shocked because they didn't even know. They thought that they really created it. Just like,
but they didn't.
Yeah, go ahead.
But they didn't, right?
No, they didn't.
Yeah.
Well, it's like the person that wins the war writes the history. So DC and Marvel are the two top dogs now, and they're telling everyone that Superman's the first superhero, but he's not. The first superhero was Zorro.
Oh, that's so
He's the first superhero. How about Tarzan? Tarzan was kind of a superhero. They didn't call them the term superheroes. They were adventurers or men.
Hercules.
Hercules. Right?
Let's go back.
Let's go back further. Noah.
Africa.
Jesus.
All the African gods were heroes.
Greek gods. Yep, those are like all superheroes. And
Ashun. If you want to go, if you're gonna do it, play the game. Yeah.
Or even Horus. So. Mythology are superheroes, and that's where we get it from. And then the heroes still are tied to mythology.
Yeah, like Thor.
They're just like Thor is Norse, right?
We just saw Wonder Woman.
Wonder Woman, right? She's like Greek, right? So that hasn't changed. They just changed their outfits.
Right. Yeah, and gave them a storyline.
Exactly. Superman is basically Jesus Christ with a cape.
Right. Exactly. Superman is Jesus.
They killed him in the movie, right? So he's
and he might come back.
He's going to be resurrected. I mean, in 3,000 years, you might have the Church of Superman.
Church of Superman. I want to doubt it.
So mythology, superheroes have always been deeply rooted in mythology, and heroes like Dick Tracy, Green Hornet, the Spirit. These characters, were always superheroes, but they didn't call them superheroes. They call them masked men or mystery men, things like that.
Vigilantes.
Right, vigilantes, things like that. So they basically have a copyright internationally that no one can use the word superhero at all, else to get sued. So, and I was probably the first person that said no. I'm the first person. I can tell you, I'm the first person without a lawyer.
Right. That's a no.
And then the second guy was in London, and he actually won his case. Whereas I settled. But I settled for a contract. Which is not really non-disclosure, but the details. But I'm still allowed to publish my book.
Right. Okay.
So
you win. You win.
I got what I wanted.
Right.
They said, "What do you want?" I said, $100,000. You're not getting that. I was like, I want a contract.
Yeah. Go second best.
And they basically outlined the contract. They agreed to it. And we signed it, and
that's all well and
that's all. Now, the funny thing is, they went after me for a book that didn't sell. But now, thanks to them, actually, before the lawsuit, I was going to cancel the title because it sold okay. It wasn't a great seller. But after the lawsuit, I was like, wow, I won. So now I got to keep this up because according to our contract, it has to remain in print.
Right.
So I have to keep it in print. Okay. So now I'm forced to keep it alive. So.
Try to push it up there.
Right.
So what's next for Bronx Heroes since you're keeping it in print?
Lots of stuff. I was thinking for the last 6 or 7 years about doing a title called Bronx Villains. And
switch it up.
Trying to have a new title with these other characters that I had created some years ago. and bring him into a villains type of universe, because all the villains in Bronx Heroes are politicians.
Oh,
They're not actually super villains.
I
so.
like that.
Yeah, they're all politics. Like Richard Nixon is the arch nemesis of Black Power.
Bringing some reality into
Right,
fiction.
right. It's like G.I. American is, which is like a parody of Captain America. His villain is Ronald Reagan.
Bring it on.
They're all
Let's
Republicans.
go all the presidents. All Republican presidents.
And World Without Superheroes was also Kennedy was in it. It's basically taking American history and giving it like a superhero twist. Kind of like Forrest Gump. Like Forrest Gump was a fictional story, but revolved around American history.
Yeah.
Brilliant film. And I was like, when I saw Forrest Gump, I was like, how do I do that with superheroes? You know. And back in the 90s, I think it was like even maybe before Forrest Gump, because this was in '93 when I was in SVA. I started trying to develop the story, and then Carmen Infantino again says, comic books are not supposed to be dark. There's heroes supposed to be happy. They're bright colors. This will never be. And I was like, hey, things are changing.
Right.
So the comic books, I see a world of comics where you'll see grittier stories, sex, violence, and it's not that they didn't exist, but that was independent stuff.
Right.
Now that's the mainstream.
Right, because there's more to an audience than like
Right.
one group
Right.
of people.
And
They
characters
cater
are
to
two-dimensional.
everybody. Right.
Right. So, and they're able to
that's
please
true.
both. You got the dark movies and you got the happy-go-lucky TV shows.
Right.
But even look at Riverdale, Archie, that they made it like Twin Peaks.
Yeah.
You
just brought back that good memory.
All right. So it's just like,
It was like, oh my god.
so it's like this debate that I had with my professors, like Denny O'Neil, who was an editor of Batman, and Infantino and Howard Post. They were just like, no, this is not. Comics is never going to go in that direction. It's like, I guess not. And Denny O'Neil is the one that brought reality into comics in the 1960s and 70s with Green Arrow and Green Lantern. So I guess he didn't want to get it much darker than that,
Right,
But because
'cause
Frank Miller kind of changed everything,
Thinking to Green Arrow, like now, it's like even the TV series is really dark.
Oh yeah, I think it's darker than the book has ever
Yeah.
been. Way over, it's just like whoa, it's too dark for me.
No, I'm more of a Flash person.
Yeah.
Flash is like completely like 180.
Yeah, it's like they basically took Batman's origin and gave it to Green Arrow. I was like,
Yeah. Not going to watch.
yeah, I mean, even though I was sued, by them and stuff, and we had a court case for 4 years, I still watch their stuff here and there,
Because it's good stuff. I mean,
it's good stuff, and I have to monitor and make sure they're not ripping me off.
Right. That's also.
So it's
stuff
like an
bad
incentive.
there.
But I did quit their comic books. I had to go cold turkey. It took me 4 years. It was like worse than a cigarette addiction,
Yeah, but,
I had to stop reading their books and, stop supplying the machine, It's
right.
like, because the truth is, every indie creator, if you want to sponsor and make your work alive and known to people, you have to support yourself.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't believe in yourself and don't put your own money behind your own creativity,
Right.
no one else is going to believe in it.
Right.
So I'm a firm believer in that. So that's why I was just like, every dollar that I got, I was like, I'm putting it towards a book,
Right.
So, I mean, that's just the reality of anyone who wants a dream or have their visions come to life. You have to back it up.
Absolutely.
There's so many artists, you'd be surprised that you go to Artist Alley, and it's great, nothing against Artist Alley, but everyone's selling prints of DC and Marvel heroes.
Mm-hmm.
And then they have their book on the side, and they make cash, but they make their money on those prints. They're not
Right.
making money on their book, and they're not
No.
promoting themselves. Imagine a convention where everyone just has original stuff, and no one in those Artist Alleys are pumping Marvel and DC.
Right.
Guess what? People stop going to Marvel and DC,
And they
they'll
go to
just
the indie artists.
Right.
And it becomes a bigger.
a
whole new
bigger thing. It'll be like
Right.
the 80s all over again. This
Right.
big explosion of like Pacific Comics and all these other
That's when it
companies that
gets
came out.
fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it opens up the market for something more. But they, right there, it tells you that they don't really believe in their own product if they're putting themselves secondary to these two big companies.
Right.
And it is a financial thing that they have to make money on the tables. But I always tell them whenever, I'm like preaching on the hilltop saying, stop supporting these guys. Stop promoting them. You know, you're not helping. They're a $1 billion company. They don't need your advertising. They don't need you as an artist. You know, and they're not going to hire you.
Right.
It's just
Right.
like, so you might as well take that leap of faith and just support yourself. I don't draw Batman and DC superheroes or Superman. I love them. They're great characters. I grew up with them. I have good memories of them. You know, but I'm not going to promote them unless they give me a paycheck.
Right.
Well, isn't that part of the problem? With there's a lot of indies that aren't really creating anything new. They're okay. Yes, they changed the clothes.
Right.
They changed it enough that they're
That's
not
another issue.
getting in problems with copyright.
Right.
But then he's a detective. He wears, I don't know, pink leather,
Right.
and he flies. But that's really Batman.
It's really Batman.
So what do you know?
That you always have that because it's like back to the well, you know? People
Okay.
will always go back to the source of where they started.
Right.
With me, when I write stories, I always feel like my stories come from people that I grew up with and people that I know, you know, and their lives. And even though some of the stories are superheroes, actually I hated superheroes when I was in college. I was reading nothing but Vertigo and all these other indie stuff, you know. Vertigo is now a sister company of DC Comics. Well, they always were kind of, but they were a separate entity. Now they're more merged. And I just grew up with reading Grant Morrison and Neil Gaiman and a lot of these guys, even when they were doing like their British comics and stuff. Alan Moore, like when he was doing like Judge Dredd and, you know, all these. I grew up with that stuff, like just because, like I said, I worked at a comic book store, so there was like an influx of books that people didn't really read, the mainstream, that were not mainstream, you know, like Stray Toasters was a book that Bill Sienkiewicz did. I mean, that book just blew my mind. And Cages and all these old books that a lot of people never heard of, you know. But look at this, like you have, now they're becoming more mainstream. You have Vertigo's Preacher is becoming a TV show. It is a TV show. You have American Gods, which was a novel, but it's comic book-alike by Neil Gaiman. Now that's a TV show, so things are coming about. But I've always been inspired by people, you know. I think the superhero twist was just the hook to get people who read superheroes to read my books.
Right.
You know, that was the only...
There's a little connection
Right.
to you. Yeah.
Right, but I never really cared about superheroes. It's just
No.
like, you know, it's like after, you know, by the time I was in college, I kind of outgrew it. And I was like, I want to read stories about real people.
Right.
You know? But I think there's a deep connection because I'm an educator with young people and they do like superheroes. I was like, well, how do I teach history, you know, and make it entertaining?
Because
Like-
right now, superheroes is like a trend with
Right.
all the movies and
Exactly.
even comic books are starting to come back, in my opinion, from the movies being
Oh, yeah,
so
you're
popular.
Right.
So it makes complete sense to try to incorporate that into education.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the Bronx Heroes' first superhero, which was a huge hit, I'm working on the sequel. It just takes a long time to produce this when you're doing it by yourself.
Right. Oh, yeah.
But Runaway Slave was a true story about a slave who escaped from New York because we had slavery in the North.
Right.
And I was like, this is a great story. I mean, this should be told. And he didn't have a name. He was called Livingston Slave. And then I saw an exhibit at the New York City exhibit that's across the street from the Natural History. And I saw this exhibit on slavery and in New York City. And I was like, well, this is amazing. And then this guy, Philip Livingston, I was like, his name sounds familiar. Why do I know this name? It's not that his name was on the Declaration of Independence, you know, as I didn't know that, you know. It's like at that time. But it was like, so I went and asked my mom, I was like, you know, you used to sit us down when we were little and tell us stories about our family from Colombia. And then she brought up the name Philip Livingston. Like, hey, we're descendants of Philip Livingston. And I was like, how's that possible? They're Dutch.
They're Dutch.
You know, it's like, so she went and explained. So all my life I was getting fed these stories about Philip Livingston and like my mom's lineage. We were from the slave family of Livingston. Says Livingston had a slave wife in New York, I later learned on, and he had children. And when slavery was ending in Colombia, in the islands, because it ended there like way before it ended in the United States, he actually went and adopted his slave under Spanish law because Spain was in control of the island, but the Dutch basically maintained it. And he opened up the first free slave church in San Andres with his children. His children were the ministers. And so all those connections, I was like, oh, I got to turn this into a comic book, which is what I'm working on now.
Spoiler alert.
Yeah, spoiler alert.
Spoiler
Yeah.
alert.
So the first story was a slave escaping from New York. I just was so compelled with that. Wow, there's slavery in New York. They never teach you this in school, not even in college.
It's always like down south. But
right, it's always
people
down
forget
south.
that it's like most of America.
They bought the slaves in New York and then brought them down south.
Right. Basically.
That's
how it works.
like Wall Street. It's like, so.
That's pretty.
Black Wall Street, do
Black
the
Wall
research.
Street.
Exactly. Black Wall Street. So.
Yep.
So I told that story as a short comic book, and it kind of blew up, you know. And ever since then, I was like, people do want to know about. People are hungry for history. They do want to know real stories.
It's fascinating.
Yeah.
There's tons of real story. I mean, when I first heard about Central Park, and basically that's where Africans lived.
Yes.
Those were all their homes.
Yes.
In Central Park?
Yes.
Yeah. They kicked them out and created a park.
Yep.
Huh.
Exactly. It was. And
crazy.
during the Great Depression, there was a huge town too. Where,
Yeah.
it was more mixed at that part, but yeah, people were sleeping in there in tents.
Right.
The entire Central Park, and that's why even when I was a kid, I think the statistic was like 6 people die a day in Central Park or some craziness. Some craziness like that.
Yeah.
Central Park was like the most dangerous park you could go to in New York City when I was young. And it was like nobody wanted to go in there. It was scary, And the few times that I did go, I almost got robbed each time. So
Oh
I was
my
like,
God.
never again. Even not that far. When I got married in 2002, I got cornered by like 6 guys in Central Park. It's like, I don't go to Central Park. Leave it. Let the tourists enjoy that.
Yeah.
You're okay on the outskirts by the city streets, but the second you get in the deep
Like
of it,
deep in, yeah.
sorry, it's like the what do they call it? The dark forest or whatever they
Dark Forest.
whatever they call it, like in those stories. Like
What, what's it, Robin Hood?
Robin Hood, yeah. Whatever. That's basically Central Park. It's a dangerous place. It really is.
It's funny now you say that because Arrow is just Robin Hood mixed with Batman.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And the Robin character was actually based on Robin Hood as well. And, Jerry Robinson created him, So it's pretty wild. Everything, like I said, everything's like mythology. Everything's tied into. Everything comes from somewhere. you
Yeah.
know?
Well, that's going to be the good segue for part 2 of this conversation. So, everyone, we'll be back. You check us part 1. If you're watching this on cable, you'll see this next week. If you're watching on the site, you gotta wait next week. But you'll see it on the site. But anyway, we'll do that.
Here you're watching it now.
Yeah, or you're watching it right now, right? That's the most important part. All right, thank you very much, sir. And we'll be back. You're watching Eclecticka.